Three spine-chilling true summer vacation tales, sinister discoveries of the haunted and cursed. The Johnson family thought they were in for a blissful summer getaway, leaving the chaos of city life behind for the quaint village of Holbrook. They envisioned peaceful days filled with sun-drenched hikes and quiet evenings by the fire. But as they pulled up to their rented cabin, the picturesque retreat seemed almost too perfect, an illusion painted against the towering pines and fog-shrouded lakes. Yet, whispers from the locals' quick glances, anxious murmurs unsettled the air around them. Missing children, shadowy figures lurking at the edges of twilight. They laughed it off as folklore meant to frighten tourists. But were they wrong? With each slam of the shutters, no wind in sight, and every echoing footstep through empty rooms, laughter faded, replaced by tension. What was once a tranquil retreat became an unease that crawled under their skin. An almost primal sense of dread began to seep into their bones. Shadows flitted just out of sight, and everything seemed to hold its breath. Mark, ever the protector, paced the cabin, while Lynn tidied up, her smile strained against a backdrop of growing anxiety. Emma, their spirited teenager, felt the pull of adventure and longed to chase the shadows herself. But each night seemed to stretch, darkness whispering secrets, gnawing at their fragile sense of safety. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. That evening felt heavier than before. After a day lost in twisting trails, Emma fled into the woods, chasing a flicker of movement. Emma, come back. Mark's voice splintered the darkness. Panic coursed through them when only echoes of their cries returned. Desperate, they plunged into the trees where the biting cold of dusk wrapped tightly around them. The shadows wove closer, their whispers teasing and taunting, drawing them deeper into the heart of the forest. What were they saying? This way or stay away. Disquiet thickened as they engaged with the townsfolk, whose smiles, though friendly, never reached their wary eyes. The sheriff's dismissive assurances gave little comfort, a frayed thread woven into the mystery of Holbrook's past. Each mention of missing persons resonated like a drumbeat in Mark's chest, reminding him of their family's fragile history. The deeper they probed, the more the glimmers of familiarity emerged, revealing a twisted bond between their ancestors and the disappearances plaguing this hauntingly beautiful place. As they unraveled the sinister connections, a chilling realization crept into their psyche. The whispers weren't just stories, they were echoes from the lost beckoning. An oppressive presence molded the very air around them, growing bolder as night swallowed the cabin whole. The forest loomed, its trees closing in like the bars of a prison, their gnarled branches gripping the sky. Mark gripped Lynn's hand, their racing hearts synchronizing with the terror surrounding them. With their daughter still ventured into the unknown, dread settled like a weight on their shoulders, a truth burning in their souls. In Holbrook, they were not just vacationers, they were perhaps the next victims of a dark legacy, forever trapped in whispers and shadows. The night deepened, wrapping the cabin in a suffocating embrace. Each creak of the wood underfoot sounded like a warning. Mark and Lynn stood in the living room, eyes darting towards the window where the tree line loomed like an ominous audience. The moon filtered through the branches, casting grotesque shadows that danced uninvited across the floor. Emma's been gone too long, Mark said, tension twisting his voice. Panic clawed at his insides. We have to find her. Lynn nodded, but her fear was tangible, a desperate chill that made her fingers tremble. What if something happened to her? The weight of unspoken fears hung heavy in the room. The memories of the locals' warnings surged back. Missing children, dark figures lurking just beyond the trees. They couldn't ignore it any longer. A heart-stopping rustle outside punctuated the stillness. Mark flinched, muscles coiled tight. Did you hear that? Keep still, Lynn whispered. They both strained to listen. The sounds of the night faded, and for a moment, it was just the hushed breath shared between them and the gnawing dread. Then, a soft call, muffled by the trees, broke the silence. Dad, Mom, Emma. Mark sprinted toward the door, adrenaline surging. Lynn grabbed his arm, pulling him back just as he reached for the handle. Wait, it could be a trap, but fear for their daughter drowned out reason. Mark burst through the door as the darkness seemed to ripple around him. Emma, where are you? The forest swayed, branches whispering secrets he couldn't understand. Lynn followed closely, a low hum of anxiety tightening around her throat. Over here. Emma's voice floated again, mixed with something else, an unearthly echo, as if there were more than one voice calling. The dense trees seemed to warp around them. Each step deeper into the woods felt like stepping back in time, into something ancient and unforgiving. Twisted roots tangled at their feet, snagging at their ankles, like the forest itself was trying to pull them down into its earth. Emma, Mark yelled, desperation spilling from his lips. Answer us. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them. Stay, come, listen. Lynn clutched Mark's arm tighter, her eyes wide as they scanned the shadows. We should turn back. This isn't right. Emma needs us. Suddenly, the trees parted and there stood Emma, no more than 20 feet ahead. But something was different about her. She was standing rigid, her body unnaturally still, eyes unfocused. Mark approached cautiously. Emma, are you okay? She didn't respond. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, a slight smirk tugging at her lips. Come closer. Chills raced down Mark's spine. No, don't. But it was too late. The whispers surged like a tidal wave, enveloping them, drowning out reason. Mark felt his feet move, drawn towards Emma and the unknown lurking in her gaze. Everything twisted and folded in on itself like the forest was feeding on their fear. As he reached Emma, his pulse thundered in his ears. Lynn's grip slipped as she staggered back in horror. Mark, she is not herself. Before he could turn back, a shadow erupted from the trees, a dark figure gliding towards them. Mark's mind raced. Visions of the stories from the townspeople flashed through his mind. He could almost see the souls trapped in those shadows, the anguished whispers growing louder by the moment. With a final scream, Mark tore himself from the grip of the darkness, reaching for his daughter one last time. But just before he could, the forest erupted in chaos. Shrill laughter echoed through the trees. The world around him slipped out of focus as cold fingers wrapped tightly around his heart, pulling him into the depths of night that he blinked. And in that instant, the forest became a maze of shadows, pulling him toward a fate he couldn't escape. What had he awakened in the woods? What ancient curse hung over Holbrook, waiting for them? The dark laughter persisted, echoing through the trees, promising that the night was far from over. Mark's heart pounded wildly as he broke the surface of darkness, breathless and gasping for understanding. The world around him twisted and pulled at his sanity, branches arching like skeletal hands, clawing at his clothes. He turned back, searching for Lynn. Lynn. Panic laced his voice. But the whispers grew, a tempest of eerie laughter that made the fine hairs on his arms stand on end. Emma. Lynn's voice cracked through the din, filled with terror and desperation. Over here. Emma's voice continued to float on the breeze, now softer, teasing, like a siren's call echoing in the night. The shadows shifted, swallowing the light, and the air turned cold like a frigid breath on his neck. Lynn, stay close, Mark called, forcing himself to push through the growing dread. He stumbled toward the voice, but the forest conspired against him, roots entangling his feet as thorny branches reached out, lacing tightly around his arms. He felt the heavy pulse of the forest, a dark heartbeat that synchronized with the chaos in his chest. Mark, Lynn cried out, suddenly just behind him, her eyes wide and haunted. Please, we have to leave. But as she spoke, another voice echoed deeper, darker, a distorted mimicry that sliced through the night. Leave, stay, it taunted, the shadows growing more pronounced around them. No, Mark shouted, but it was as if the night itself consumed his voice. He grasped at the branches, scrambling to break free, tugging himself toward Emma's last sight, struggling to remember the girl who had always been full of laughter. That girl was not here. Instead, he stood before a wraith composed of darkness and mirthless joy. Emma's smile seemed too wide, too unnatural, as she beckoned him closer. Come closer, Daddy, it's fun here. Mark's heart sputtered. What have they done to you? The shadows swirled closer, and for the first time, He noticed the faces trapped within, faces twisted in anguish, pleading for release. He staggered back, realization flooding him with cold. They were lost souls, snared by the very forest that twisted around them, seeking new victims through the guise of familiarity. No, he roared, fear morphing into rage. You're not my daughter. Daddy, you must stay. Emma's voice, now mingled with the whispers, sounded accusatory, a call to arms from the depths of the abyss. Lynn, brave yet terrified, gripped Mark's shoulder. We need to fight. We have to find a way out. The darkness hissed in response, coiling even tighter, feeding off their fear. Each breath felt heavier, suffocating them with dread. Mark. Lynn's voice trembled as the figure of Emma dove into the shadows, disappearing with a flick of her hair. Emma. Mark lunged, desperation clawing his throat as he blindly chased, but the forest became alive, warping around him. The laughter intensified, a cacophony of despair that sent chills down his spine. Face the truth. It screamed, the air vibrating with sinister joy. Something sharp sliced through the darkness. It was a branch, jagged and glistening, plunging toward him. Mark barely managed to dodge. His instincts screamed at him to run. Let her go? He screamed, but the words seemed to evaporate into the shadows. Each beat of his heart echoed with the weight of failure, his breath quickening, teeth gritted against mounting panic. As the shadows gathered, the shrieks of lost souls pierced his thoughts. Everything crumbled around him, pulling him into the void. The last strand of hope frayed. Would they be consumed by the darkness forever? Would they succumb to the ancient curse that haunted Holbrook? Then, just as the darkness seemed ready to choke out the light, a sudden silence fell. Echoes faded into an ominous stillness. Something was there, watching. Something more than human. Mark felt a presence shift beside him, brimming with malevolence. He turned, eyes wide. In the stillness, he caught a glimpse of a looming shape. With eyes like burning coals, what did it want? And worse, was it there for them? The figure loomed closer, its eyes piercing into Mark's soul. A chill coursed through him, like ice, settling deep in his bones. Darkness expanded, pressing in on all sides, threatening to swallow everything: his hope, his daughter, his very sanity. Mark. Lynn whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The fear in her widened eyes mirrored his own. What do we do? The outline of the creature began to shift, no longer just a shadow. It morphed into a grotesque caricature of a man, its features swirling like smoke. Each transformation eliciting more panic in Mark's heart. Stay, it hissed, the voice echoing like a fractured mirror. He recoiled, muscles tightening with adrenaline. The air grew thick and suffocating, their collective breaths forming clouds of despair. He could feel the whispers trying to latch onto his mind, scraping against the edges of his consciousness. But he couldn't let it, he wouldn't let it. Lynn, we can't stay. We must run, he shouted, his voice stronger now, mixing defiance with frantic urgency. The mere act of speaking felt like a lightning bolt coursing through the dank air. Before Lynn could protest, he took her hand, holding it tightly as he turned away from the phantom. The forest was a twisted maze, paths looking familiar, yet bending into darkness that seemed alive, hungry. They stumbled over roots and undergrowth, every step fueled by fear. Each heartbeat thundered in Mark's ears, drowning out the echoes of lost souls. The creature's guttural laughter trailed after them, a spooky whistle on the wind. Run, run, but you cannot hide. Terrified, they plunged deeper into the trees, the grasp of the shadows loosening just enough for them to push through. Each flicker of movement caught Mark's attention. Every whisper made his skin crawl. Where do we go? Lynn cried. Desperation and fatigue etched into her features as the darkness loomed closer. Follow the light, Mark shouted, spotting a flickering in the distance. It glowed like a lantern. Maybe it was a way out, a hope amidst the despair. The faith in the light surged between them as they ran harder, limbs straining, lungs burning. But what if it's a trap? Lynn gasped, doubt creeping into her voice. We have to try? We can't let this thing win. They pressed on, the light drawing them in, an almost magnetic pull. With every step closer, the laughter intensified, transformed into jagged screeches as the apparition roared behind them, fuming with rage. Suddenly, the trees thinned, the light becoming blinding as they broke free from the forest's grasp. But as they emerged, Horror struck again. Before them stood a clearing, wide and filled with a fog that swirled like a living thing. The light flickered, taunting them. Yet there was something darker lurking in the edges, just out of sight. Wait, Mark halted, instinct nagging at the edge of his mind. This isn't right, it's too quiet. The laughter faded into an eerie silence, replaced by a heavy, almost suffocating chill. The clearing felt wrong, almost like a waiting room, filled with unseen eyes. Shadows danced just out of reach, watching. What now? Lynn whispered, fear gripping her as they stepped further into the clearing. And then it happened. The ground trembled underfoot, and from the fog, a figure rose, a twisted form of screams and shadows, tendrils reaching out toward them. Mark realized, too late, they had walked straight into a trap. Go back, he shouted, but it was too late. The horror surged forward, consuming everything in its path. Mark and Lynn stood frozen, terror clawing at their minds, the true nightmare beginning to unfold. What was stirring in the depths of the fog? Would they be lost in its grasp too? The figure loomed larger, tendrils stretching towards them, hungry for their fear. Mark dragged Lynn back, but there was nowhere to escape. Panic flooded his system, heating his blood and freezing his thoughts. Lynn, we need to, but the words twisted in his throat. The monstrosity surged forward, and icy fingers brushed against Mark's arm, leaving him paralyzed as if solidified by fear. He could feel the energy drain from him, pulled into the swirling mass. Mark, Lynn screamed, her voice a desperate cry echoing in the fog. It snapped him out of his paralysis. Adrenaline shot through him once more. He pulled her closer, lifting his chin defiantly at the grotesque shape that hovered before them, its eyes now two smoldering pits of darkness. Back! We go back, Mark urged, his heart racing, pumping adrenaline into aching limbs. But behind them, the sinister forest felt like a wall, closing in on their escape. Shadows flickered with each heartbeat, ready to engulf them. Where? Lynn's eyes darted frantically, searching for any glimmer of hope. What if it's already too late? Desperation seeped into her voice, threading an urgency through his veins. The fog thickened around them, carrying whispers that swirled like a blizzard. The creature's form twisted and wriggled, shifting in and out of focus. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that it was absorbing their fear, growing stronger. Listen, he shouted over the cacophony of dread. We push through toward the light. We must reach it. He could see the distant illumination flickering like hope against despair, a beacon beckoning. With a fierce grip on Lynn's wrist, he dashed towards the glow. They ran, the ground trembling beneath their feet, the sounds of snarls and horrors trailing sharply behind them. Each breath felt labored, lungs burning with fear and exhaustion. But as they sprinted, the ground no longer felt solid. The soft earth shifted, pulling at their legs like a mudslide. Mark stumbled, catching himself just in time. Keep going, he shouted, spitting defiantly against the force pulling them down. Lynn pushed past him. Don't look back. Just run. They surged forward, the light drawing closer, illuminating the thick fog with a baleful glow. The creature behind them snarled, its voice dripping with malice. Fools, you think you can escape? Ignoring the freezing grip of terror clawing at their minds, they kept going. Mark's heart raced, matching the pounding of their feet on soft ground. They could taste freedom, the light promising life beyond the shadows. Then, just as they thought they would burst forth into the clearing, the light flickered and dimmed, a sinister laugh echoing around them. It's just an illusion, the creature creaked, its haunting tone embedding itself deep in his psyche. You are already mine. Lynn let out a pained gasp in reply, and Mark felt her energy wane, as if the hope was being sucked right out of her. No, fight it, he yelled, but her eyes dulled, despair swirling around them like fabric from a dark nightmare, weaving deeper into the abyss. They stumbled again, the landscape morphing around them. Mark could barely breathe, fear suffocating him. The light was vanishing, swallowed by the encroaching shadows. The laughter was deafening now, reverberating against the now solidified darkness, mocking their desperate rush to safety. Lynn's voice trembled, thickening with doom. What if we never escape? In that instant of connection, Mark locked eyes with her. The truth crashed down on him like a wave. They had to confront the horror, not run away. Lynn, listen, we have to face it. Together. but the fog twisted around them, as if alive, dragging them back into despair. Would they be swallowed by the entity that hunted them? Or was this just the beginning of something far worse? With the encroaching shadows threatening to engulf them, they took a deep breath. What awaited them on the other side? Desperation clashed with resolve as they stood at the precipice of horror. Would they become part of the nightmare? Or could they still find a way to battle through the dark? As the creature lunged, claws outstretched, Mark realized that their only hope was about to reveal itself in the terrifying choice ahead. Would they be brave enough? Or was it already too late for survival? The moment froze, time suspended between the clawing horror of the creature and the fragile courage of Mark and Lynn. As its form lunged forward, the shadowy tendrils seemed to stretch into eternity. Mark's heart thundered in his chest, drowning out the monster's taunting laughter, eclipsing even the darkness around them. It was now or never. Face it, Mark shouted, pulling Lynn closer, his voice hoarse. Fight back. He didn't know what he was asking for, but instinct told him they could not succumb to despair. Hope burned brightly in his chest, flickering like the distant light that was now only a memory. Lynn's eyes glimmered, but fear still gripped her, a chain that seemed to grow heavier with every howl from the encroaching void. How? It's too powerful, she gasped, tears mingling with the fog, dissolving their last vessel of courage. By fighting together, Mark gripped her shoulders, feeling the warmth of her skin contrasted against the cold of the supernatural mist. We're not just running, we're standing our ground. Fueled by the adrenaline of their last hope, they shifted their stances, turning to face the looming dread. The creature hesitated, as if surprised by their defiance, its shadows screeching against the piercing wind that whirled around them. I can feel your fear, it hissed, curling its jaw menacingly. You will be devoured. Not today, Mark shouted, and for a moment, the light flickered again, illuminating Lynn's face, reminding him of all the moments that mattered, her laughter, her dreams, and even the very warmth that made their bond unbreakable. In that instant, something transformed. Mark felt an intensity rising from both of them, an energy that defied the shadowy entity before them. He reached deep within himself, grasping for any glimmer of power his heart could muster. You're nothing but smoke and echoes of fear. You'll never have us. With a surge of determination, the pair pushed forward. Mark extended his arm, feeling lynched in a rush of brightness. His hand met the creature's shadow, dispersing it like fog retreating from the sunrise. Lynn's eyes widened, the darkness tugging at her features dissipating, revealing strength. Let us go, Mark urged, his voice igniting a spark within her. They surged together, an unbreakable force against the monster that once seemed invincible. But the laughter soon morphed into a wail. The entity recoiled, writhing in fury. You think this means victory? You are tethered to the darkness forever. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble violently. Hold on, Mark shouted, as the fog churned around them, the earth splitting like a cruel smile, making shadows dance with grotesque glee. Mark, what is happening? Lynn gripped his arm, panic spilling over. The ground was breaking into chasms, swallowing the remnants of the forest around them. Then, from the depths, an otherworldly scream erupted, a sound so filled with agony it resonated through every fiber of their being. The creature was not yet finished. It clawed back, launching its sorrow like a missile of darkness, piercing straight into their minds. Stop! No! Lynn shrieked, falling to her knees as the echoes invaded her thoughts. Don't listen! Mark yelled, pulling her. Keep moving. He dragged her along as their surroundings distorted and blurred, a nightmare of confusion. The light, once a beacon, flickered feebly like a dying star now, as fog enveloped them yet again. Keep your eyes on me, he cried out, desperate to maintain the connection, to fight the shadows that were tearing at their resolve. They stumbled forward, launching into the murky depths where clarity was lost. The ground twisted, bending like a restless serpent, each step robbing them of strength. Crushing despair mingled with frantic hope. Their breaths quickened. Just then, as they adorned in despair, a burst of light emerged ahead, the final sanctuary. A warped gateway pulsed with a strange glow. Mark felt it tug at him, promising salvation. But whispers of the past hypnotized the air, echoes of memories long buried. fears they thought they had. Defeated. Mark, we can't give up, Lynn shouted, her voice cutting through the fog like a lifeline. They reached the edge of the gateway, every second fraught with uncertainty. Together? Mark's voice trembled, but his eyes burned with determination. Together, she affirmed, eyes fierce with resolve. As they stepped through the threshold, they were engulfed in brightness, only to hear the creature's final words, a promise that dripped with malevolence. You may flee today, but you will return to feed my hunger. What lay beyond the light? Freedom? Or another trap set by the malevolence they hoped to escape? As they stepped into the unknown, the world shifted around them, spiraling into confusion and darkness. A new horror awaited. But time was running out as they plunged into the heart of the enigma. Would they face their fears again? Light swallowed them whole, an overwhelming brilliance wrapping around their bodies like a cocoon. Mark's heart raced as he felt the weight of the darkness slip slightly from his chest. But that feeling didn't last. The brightness distorted, flickered, and morphed into a blinding haze that left them disoriented. As the brilliance dimmed, they found themselves in a cold, stark room, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. The walls were bare, made of concrete that felt slick with an unseen residue, and the fluorescent lights above buzzed ominously. Mark blinked, trying to clear the fog from his vision. He quickly turned to Lynn. "Are you okay?" he asked, anxiety scratching at the edges of his courage. She nodded slowly, but her expression spoke volumes. Fear was etched into her features. "What is this place?" she whispered, glancing around as if the shadows themselves had eyes. "I don't know," Mark replied, his voice a low murmur. He felt a creeping dread swell in the pit of his stomach, a familiar sense of malice that clawed at the edges of his mind. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights sputtered and flickered erratically, plunging them into moments of darkness that felt impossibly thick. With each flicker, whispers crawled into their ears, incoherent murmurs that felt all too personal. Mark closed his eyes, trying to block them out. Memories, regrets, fears raining down like a relentless storm. "Make it stop," Lynn cried, clutching her head, crumbling to the ground. The shadows twisted at her feet like serpents, drawing ever closer. "Lynn, fight it," he yelled, reaching toward her, but the space between them felt like an unbridgeable chasm. He stumbled forward, feeling the suffocating weight of despair press down on him. "Mark," she gasped, her voice trembling. "I can't, don't you dare give in." He pulled at the tendrils of his own fears, grappling with them, recalling the warmth of her laughter and the strength of their bond. "Remember us. Remember hope. We can beat this." As if a switch had been flipped, the whispers grew louder, filling the room with a twisted cacophony of laughter and sorrow. Mark felt his mind swim, but he refused to let go. A surge of pure determination ignited within him, forcing the shadows back a measure. "Remember the light," he shouted. "It's still there." Lynn's eyes momentarily flickered with recognition. Just as quickly, anguish clouded them over again. The shadows tightened their grip, pulling her further into the claustrophobic darkness. "No." Mark lunged forward, stretching out his hand. The brightness of their previous encounter surged in his heart, a beacon guiding him. "We're stronger together." With that mantra echoing between them, he felt an unfamiliar energy boil up from within. It exploded outward, a shockwave of determination that pushed the shadows back once again. Desperate whispers evolved into anguished cries, reverberating against the concrete walls, filled with rage and confusion. Suddenly, a blinding flash surged from the palpitating darkness, illuminating the room in an eerie glow. The consciousness of the creature, or was it countless creatures, felt almost palpable, as if it had materialized in front of them. "You dare defy me?" it shrieked, a discordant symphony of voices echoing in unison. "You are mine." Mark felt bile rise in his throat, but he would not falter. "No, we want to be yours." The energy surged again, flaring like a wildfire, igniting every corner of the dim room. With a deafening roar, the entity swung back, recoiling from their determination as Mark and Lynn clasped hands, uniting their will against the dread. But the room began to shake violently, cracks appearing in the walls, the very foundation crumbling as rough whispers clawed at their minds once more. What had they unleashed? Was this just a delay against the monster's wrath? As they pressed tighter together, The shadows seemed to dissolve, but outside their fragile sanctuary, chaos raged. Would they finally escape, or was something far worse waiting just beyond their reach? Their breaths came rapid, each heartbeat a countdown. Mark couldn't he shake the feeling that the real battle was only beginning. As the dark entity's wails echoed in the distance, a new terror clawed at consciousness. The shadows were learning, and their pursuit was far from over. The ground trembled beneath them, shuddering with raw, primal energy. Mark and Lynn's grip tightened as they leaned against each other, their breaths turning frantic. The walls vibrated, sending a nauseating wave through the air. This nightmare was alive, and it knew they were there. "We need to move," Mark shouted, his voice barely piercing through the chaos. But Lynn stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror. The shadows around her writhed and pulsed, whispering sweet nothings and dark promises that clawed at the edges of her sanity. Panic surged through him. "Lynn, please." In a flash, the whispers multiplied, becoming a tempest of sound that enveloped them. Each voice was familiar, each one a personal dagger twisting in their minds. Doubts forged in every mistake. Every day they failed to recognize the darkness within themselves. Memories, now morphing into agony, loomed over them like a loaded gun. "Mark, help me. I can't breathe." Lynn gasped, swiping at the air as if it were made of shards of glass. He forced himself to his feet, pushing against the sting of dread creeping up his spine. They had to act. "Follow my voice," he yelled, but the shadows seemed bent on swallowing her whole. "In the light. I remember the light," she suddenly screamed, as if ignited by his words. Her eyes flicked to the growing shadows towering menacingly. Mark felt a surge of hope, a flicker of rebellion against the encroaching darkness. "That's it. Together, we can find it." With new resolve, he reached for her hand, but a whip-like tendril shot out from the deeper shadows, striking her wrist. It was ice cold, like fingers from a grave, dragging her into the heart of the darkness. "Lynn." He tugged hard, but the shadows were powerful, relentless like a raging storm. "Mark," she cried, her voice splintering into desperation, but her shout quickly became a whimper as the darkness clawed at her. Panic surged in him. He couldn't lose her. "No," Mark roared, and with everything he had, he plunged forward into the thick of the shadow, the darkness trying to snatch him too. But the memories of joy and warmth surged through him like a torrent, his heart swelling with an urgency that fueled his will. Each step felt like running against a tide, but he refused to yield. In a desperate act, he yanked Lynn free, and they both fell, tumbling to the floor as light flickered dimly in their minds. The shadows hissed, retreating slightly at their combined strength as if recoiling from the potential of the light they recalled together. "Get up," he shouted, grabbing her hands again. "We can't stop. We have to keep moving." They scrambled to their feet, the chaotic whispers now swelling into a monstrous roar. Just ahead, a door appeared, glowing faintly amid the chaos. It stayed slightly ajar, beckoning to them like a lighthouse in a storm. "Is that?" Lynn began, hope battling against fear. Mark nodded, breathless. They charged towards it together, but the shadows surged in pursuit, a dark wave crashing upon the door. "Hurry," he yelled, forcing the door wider, adrenaline coursing through his veins. They slipped through. The shadows clawed at their heels, shrieking with fury, the sound echoing like nails on metal. The door slammed shut behind them, but the wails still echoed, vibrating against the cold steel. Inside, a corridor stretched out like a gaping maw, lined with flickering lights that seemed nearly alive. The air held a chill, thick with inexplicable dread. Mark's heart pounded. But where were they now? Was it a safe haven or another snare? The corridor felt like a living thing, shifting and breathing. And then, a voice came from the darkness ahead, sibilant, sweetly deceptive. "You think you're safe, don't you?" Mark's blood ran cold, and instinct screamed, they weren't safe yet. What awaited them at the end of this passage? A new horror, or the path to freedom? The shadows were still hungry, and now they had the scent of hope, the strongest lure of all. What had they awoken? What lay ahead in this haunted holdout? Mark felt Lynn's hand slip slightly from his grip, a shiver running through him at the thought of losing her again. The corridor stretched out like a dark tunnel into oblivion, its flickering lights casting twisted shadows that danced along the walls. They had barely escaped the jaws of one nightmare, and yet here they stood, teetering on the brink of another. "Stay close," he murmured, pulling her harder against him as they moved forward, their feet sinking into the cold, damp floor like quicksand. Each step echoed, reverberating with uncertainty and dread. "What do we do?" Lynn's voice trembled, its fragility matching the lengthening shadows creeping toward them. The whisper from earlier lingered in the air like a lingering scream. "Is this place just a trap?" Mark swallowed hard, attempting to rally the remnants of courage within him. "We keep going. That voice, it's trying to find our fears. We can't let it." The deeper they went, the heavier the air felt, laden with whispers of long-lost sorrow, as if the very walls were moaning in despair. The corridor twisted slightly. A stain, dark and viscous, glimmered against the dim light. Mark halted. "Lynn, look," she gasped, covering her mouth as she knelt to touch the sticky substance with shaking fingers. "What is this?" she whispered, horror dawning upon her features. "Blood." The words slipped from his lips like ice. A sickening splash of memories rushed at him, morning reports of people going missing, stories of dark secret places that thrived on human fear. He could feel his heart thunder in rebellion against this reality. "Mark." Lynn's voice was barely a breath. "We need to get out of here." Suddenly, the flickering lights flashed more violently, casting intense shadows that seemed to morph. Shapes danced at the edges of their sight, and with each flicker, the voices grew louder, filling the passage with their maddening cacophony, clawing at the simplicity of their thoughts. "Can't you hear it?" Mark shouted over the din. "We have to block them out." They pressed their hands to their ears, but the voices slithered into their minds, wrapping themselves around their very essence, dissecting their insecurities. The sudden cold snap of air sent shivers racing down Mark's spine. He risked a glance back. Darkness loomed, a swirling mass that left no light in its wake. "It's coming," he yelled, adrenaline pumping through him. "Run!" Lynn screamed, her feet already pounding against the floor, racing deeper into the corridor. Mark caught her wrist, pulling her close again as they flew forward, lungs burning, desperation propelling them. They pushed against the walls, feeling the chilled air close in tight, and suddenly, the floor beneath them quaked again. The corridor seemed to inhale, the very space narrowing as if it was a predator ready to strike. "What if there's no end?" Lynn gasped, wild dread flooding her eyes. "There has to be," Mark insisted, fortifying his steps. "Just trust me. We can't give in." As they rounded a corner, the lights flickered out altogether, shrouding them in total darkness. A low rumble filled the air, like a growl from the abyss, and the ground beneath their feet rumbled violently, as if the structure itself was protesting their presence. "Mark," Lynn breathed, her voice cracking, fear dripping from every syllable. "I think it's too late." Just as those words hit the air, they came across what looked like a door, but it was different. It glimmered with a sickly, inviting light, almost pulsating as if it breathed. Mark felt an irresistible pull toward it, and confusion twisted in his gut. Was it salvation or another trap? In that moment, the shadows roared back, swelling around them like a tsunami of despair. No more running, the sibilant voice cooed, now closer, taunting them. What awaited them behind that door? Would it be the end of their nightmare, or the beginning of something worse? As the darkness surged toward them, the weight of their choices pressed down like iron shackles. There was no turning back now. The door swung open, but what lay beyond? Mark and Lynn didn't give themselves time to second-guess. They charged through the door, shoulder to shoulder, forcing their way into whatever lay beyond. Light enveloped them like a warm embrace, blinding in its intensity. As they stumbled inside, they found themselves standing in a vast hall, walls lined with mirrors, each reflecting their weary, frightened faces back at them. "Is this it?" Lynn whispered, her voice a tiny echo in the expansive space. The air felt different, thick yet electric, like the calm before a storm. The mirrors pulsed with a faint light, drawing Mark's attention. They seemed to be alive, shifting with shadows and swirling whispers that had grown eerily quiet. "This must be it," Mark breathed, stepping hesitantly toward the closest mirror. But as he neared, something shifted behind his reflection, an unsettling movement in the glass. The realm of shadows they had fled flickered just below the surface, almost leaking into this seemingly safe space. Then, without warning, the mirrors cracked like thunder. Lynn yelped, covering her head, as shards cascaded to the floor, sending them both stumbling backward. The light dimmed, and from each crack, a figure emerged, twisted silhouettes of those they had lost, haunting and echoing with sorrowful wails. Mark. Lynn's voice trembled as the figures drew closer, faces of lost souls reflecting their terror. They've found us. No, Mark shouted, the sound of his own heartbeat deafening in his ears. We have to fight back. Remember what we faced together. He grabbed Lynn's hand, summoning the warmth of their shared love, the strength of their memories. We're not alone. We have each other. With a surge of newfound courage, they felt a spark ignite between them, pushing back against the tide of despair. The shadows shied away, recoiling from the radiant light they emanated together, striking at the corners of their memories with every lingering doubt they the shadows whirled. A familiar figure stepped from one of the mirrors, Emma. But she appeared different, her eyes blank and vacant, a haunting echo of her former self. Daddy, Mommy, she whispered, a siren-esque call that sent lances of fear up Mark's spine. Her voice merged with the cacophony around them, a chilling harmony of despair. No, Mark shouted again, steeling himself against the sorrow that threatened to crush him. This isn't her. Emma, you have to fight. The mist around Emma shimmered, and for a second, clarity sparked in her eyes. Help me, she cried, her voice traveling through the murkiness like a lighthouse beam piercing a storm. Fight, Emma. You're stronger than this. We're here, Lynn yelled, her voice like a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. Mark could feel Lynn's grip tighten, both in fear and determination. They surged forward together, hands clasped tightly, pouring every ounce of their love into the light they conjured together. As they reached for Emma, the darkness roared angrily, shadows swirling even faster. But they pressed on, refusing to relent. The closer they got, the more Emma's figure warped and twisted, darkened by the shadows that threatened to devour her whole. Yet, in their hearts burned the images of happier moments, the laughter, the warmth of family dinners, the feel of her embrace. Finally, as they grasped her outstretched hand, a brilliant light erupted from their union, casting out the shadows like the breaking of dawn. Emma gasped as color returned to her cheeks, and the shadows shrieked in agony, evaporating into nothingness. Daddy, Mommy, she sobbed, embracing them tightly, her warmth casting away the lingering chill of fear. You're okay. You're safe. Lynn wept, tears of relief streaming down her face. But the air still crackled with energy, and Mark felt a familiar sensation, a presence lurking at the edges, waiting for a moment of weakness. Stay close, he urged, pulling both of them into a tight circle, and together they faced the remnants of the evil they had battled. The dark cloud began to gather, swirling with a desperate rage as echoes of despair filled the room. You think you've won? The collective voices hissed, sharpened by desperation. You are bound to me. You can't escape. Mark squared his shoulders, steeling himself. You're wrong. You're nothing but a nightmare. We choose to fight. There was fire in his words, a determination that burned brighter than the shadows above. In a heartbeat, they concentrated on their love, the light that had saved them from the edge of darkness. It shone forth in radiant waves, illuminating the hall, reflecting back against the mirrors, and pushing the darkness further away. The figures of the truly lost flickered and gasped with newfound life, their faces transforming as the chains of sorrow shattered. The entity writhed and screamed, twisting against the charm of hope. No, you can't do this. But Mark, Lynn, and Emma stood resolved, anchored together by their unbreakable bond. We can, and we will, they shouted in unison. In a blinding flash, the light consumed the darkness completely, radiating outward. The terrible presence imploded, sucked back into the void from which it emerged, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. For a moment, the world stood still. Then they fell to their knees, the weight of fear lifting as an unbearable relief washed over them. Is it over? Emma asked, tears still shimmering in her eyes. Mark nodded, pulling both girls close, cradling them in warmth. It's over. We're free. And as the light faded, They stood together, united against the shadows, knowing that while darkness might linger in corners of their lives, they had the power to fight it together. As a family, they stepped through the door between two worlds, emerging into the warm glow of the sunlit forest outside. Relief flooded their senses. The binds of Holbrook were severed, and behind them lay a tale of terror that had forged them anew. They embraced tightly, towering trees standing like steadfast sentinels. "We made it," Lynn whispered, the wind carrying her words like sweet promises. Mark smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "We'll keep making it. Together." And that day, in Holbrook's haunted retreat, the Johnson family banished darkness, choosing love and courage over fear. They turned toward the path leading away from the cabin, ready to reclaim their lives. And as they walked into the warmth of the day, a chilling laughter echoed faintly in the trees, but it no longer held power over them. They were stronger now, each step a testament to the bonds they shared, every heartbeat a reminder of hope's light shining eternal. But that was not the end of the story. As they ventured back to their car, ready to leave this eerie chapter behind, Mark cast one last glance at the cabin, knowing full well that the shadows might always linger, distorted whispers in the breeze. They would be vigilant, together. And with that thought echoing in their hearts, they began their journey home. That if you made it through this incredible journey with us, you need to subscribe now to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and show us your support. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this haunting conclusion. And don't wait even one more second, share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this thrilling conclusion. Your support keeps our stories alive.